Hello and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast, brought to you by the Institute for Liberal Values. This is where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In this week's podcast, Elizabeth Spivak and Mike Burke meet with Lee Jussim, Distinguished Professor of Psychology at Rutgers University. We discuss his participation in the creation of the new Princeton Principles for a campus of free inquiry, and in particular, how and why advocates for free and open inquiry felt the need to readdress the current crisis of academic conformity currently afflicting educational institutions in the United States and beyond. Okay, everybody, hello. Welcome to the Dissidents Podcast. We are back with Lee Jussim, who we once interviewed back when we were the Counterweight podcast. What happened to Counterweight? That's another story. Lee's here today to talk about, among other things, the new Princeton Principles, which we hope will replace the Chicago Principles, which were kind of a step in the right direction, maybe didn't go far enough, but I'm sure Lee will talk about that.
I have a real affinity for the Kalven Report also, and I think, so that's my favorite. But I am really interested in how this came to be. How did you all come together, and what made you come to the decision that now was the time to update these things?
Yeah. Okay. So first, thank you for having me. Good to see you both again. It's very nice. I was in a secondary player. I mean, I think the two main organizers were Robbie George, who is a law professor, I think, at Princeton, and Keith Whittington. Now, there may have been other actors involved in this, but and he's one of the lead guys and one of the founders of the fairly new Academic Freedom Alliance that was formed about a year or so ago to stand up for academic freedom in the face of growing threats from all sides. And it's okay. So there, I would say I'm a little bit uncomfortable speaking for the group, but my sense is that at least this group, and not only this group, but you asked about this group in particular, had a sort of a growing sense that unless faculty did something to bolster the protections for academic freedom and free inquiry, if we just allowed, the sort of social, political, and cultural norms to keep going the way they were going, it was going to get worse and worse. And so it was time to pick up the ball and see what we could do with it. I think that was really the spirit, and there was some pretty sophisticated people in that group. So people with long histories on this stuff.
And a long list of people. I mean, not as many as on, who signed the Declaration of Independence, but but quite a lot. And so, did you come together via Zoom, or did you actually get in a room and sort of hammer these out?
Oh yeah, we met. Yeah, we absolutely met, and we absolutely hammered it out. But there were also discussions mostly by email. There were drafts and criticisms and, and all that sort of stuff. So, but yeah, no, we met for, it was a single meeting, but maybe it was over 2 days, and it was a lot. It was pretty intense, and we really kind of hammered things out. So yeah. And
did you start with things like the Kalven Report and the Chicago Report?
Yeah. Well, so, the Princeton Principles statement fully embraces both the Chicago Principles and the Kalven Report. It's not like, oh, well, they were pretty good, but they had these problems and we need to replace them. It was more like this was an attempt to build on and strengthen and implement those ideas and sort of lay out a plan or guidelines. Not a plan goes a little too far. Guidelines for implementing practices within academia that would have some hope of strengthening the principles outlined in the Chicago Principles, where we fully endorse and the Kalven Report. Right. I mean, both sets. Right. So I don't know how much your listeners are going to know. The Chicago statement is really primarily about free speech and academic freedom. The Kalven Report sort of throws a gauntlet down and says universities should remain neutral on most ideological and political topics. That is, the president shouldn't be shouldn't be making institutional statements about what the institution stands for, with values, politics, controversies, with a couple of exceptions. I'll hold off on the exceptions, but the institutional neutrality part. Anyway, so those things they're related, but they're different. And they're related because I think those of us who believe that institutions should remain neutral on most political controversies believe that because failing to do so will overflow into threats to academic freedom and free inquiry. At the point that the university stands for some political position, it at best it's going to chill the speech or risks chilling the speech, and at worst they may start enforcing it,
Right.
in all sorts of ways. So the two are connected, but they're different.
Yeah, I mean, one of the lines which I did recognize from from your new Princeton Principles, a version of this: the university is the home and sponsor of critics. It's not itself a critic. It must sustain an environment of freedom of inquiry to perform its mission, independent of political passions, and pressures.
Right.
And
right.
We certainly have those now.
Yes, and the word is, and it's fashion, isn't it? Like a lot of this is fashion, because a lot of the positions that these professors are taking up are not coherently thought through. If they had have thought them through, they wouldn't be as childish as they seem. For example, they're not stupid, are they, Lee? I mean, maybe one or two of them genuinely are stupid. But if they had have sat down and thought about these, given these ideas the thought that they deserve, then they wouldn't. The iterations that we're getting wouldn't be like as childish as they are. I mean, one of the universities I'm associated with, a prestigious one in the UK, for example, famous UK university, in the aftermath of George Floyd, just started sending emails out to all of its students, affirming that this was all about racism, even when the prosecution never made that case. And there was no evidence to say that it was about racism or anything like that. Yeah. And then said, we stand with Black Lives Matter automatically, without even considering that there was already like a body of evidence, a significant body of evidence from criminology that would say that, wow, this is going to have a massive Ferguson effect that is going to disproportionately impact, most of all, upon poor ethnic minority, largely Black inner city people. And so if you were saying, you couldn't say something like that, even though that was, but it was true. I mean, it hadn't come to pass yet, but I mean, it was a good call, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. In 2020, 2021, if you said that, you would be attacked. You'd be announced attacked, and you would be at risk of some form of punishment. Now it has gotten, you're still at risk of being denounced. And there's some risk of punishment still, but that has receded somewhat, I think, in part because of why. I'm not, I don't really know why. I think that to some extent there has been a public backlash against, most people hate this cancellation stuff.
Oh, of course.
They really hate it. They hate the public shaming and the denouncing, and they just really, they hate it. And they hate the politicization of universities. They hate that also. They want, people with kids want their kids to be able to go to a school and get a freaking education and not suffer political indoctrination. Not that universities are nothing but indoctrination. It's probably not many classes, but it probably is some in many universities. And it shouldn't be any, is the point.
And I think there's some in the orientation. Like, I don't think they're getting an orientation to free speech, but they are getting an orientation to
social justice, basically.
Yes. And so that's part of their orientation package is the social justice, but not free speech, not academic freedom. So they're not even getting that piece. So yeah, I don't know that they're being, I think you're right. Like, I mean, there are definitely a few classes, a few professors, whatever, where that's going on. I also think a big part of it is, even if people don't like the cancellation stuff, they are afraid but for the grace of
Oh,
God, right?
yeah.
And so they're going to go ahead, they're going to, go along to get along. Certainly nobody's going to speak up in anyone's, on anyone's behalf. And I think that the part that they do like is that they get to participate in a social narrative. It's like, look
Right.
at me, I get to like
Yeah.
something, friend someone,
Yeah.
whatever, tweet something out, retweet. And I think they like that,
The endorphin
Well, I
hits.
think you both have made separately really good points. One is that, Elizabeth, you're absolutely right. The universities do not teach free speech, academic freedom, open inquiry. I mean, it might occur in some weird law class on the First Amendment or something like that, but it's not generally part of the college intellectual culture. Now, about 3 or 4 years, I guess maybe longer than 4 or 5 years ago, I started incorporating that into my intro social psychology class.
Oh, good.
This was for two reasons. One was you can't engage in social science research on controversial topics unless you have the academic freedom to do, and you're protected to do so. You can't possibly do it. So it is the foundation upon which everything else is built. That's reason one. And then reason two, which is beyond the scope of this conversation, was the replication crisis. So the replication crisis, swept away, like, I don't know, big hunks of social psychology. So it's like, I'm not going to teach that. I'm not going to teach that. And we don't really know that's wrong, but we don't know that's right either. So I'm going to teach that. So I had space. I had all this space. And it's like, what should I do with the space? And that was one of the things I did with it. So you're absolutely right about that. Mike, you're right. Faculty aren't stupid. I mean, they usually have PhDs and they write academic articles. But the way I think about it is ideology rots people's brain, especially dogma. Dogmas especially rot the brain. So it doesn't matter that they're smart in some SAT GRE sense, they're articulate, they use 5-syllable words, by sort of conventional markers, they're smart, but they are, as far as I can tell, about as vulnerable to the, and maybe more so,
I would
biases
say.
to the biases, distortions that come from ideological dogmas for anyone, and they are more susceptible to conformity pressures because within academia, especially within the social sciences and humanities, may also be true to some degree in the natural sciences, your success doesn't hinge on you doing anything that's actually true. It doesn't hinge on you discovering something that will change the world even in a small way. It hinges on what other people think of you, right? That's what every step in academic success hinges on what other people say at you. How do you get into graduate school? Well, maybe you have a good GPA, but
everybody does now.
I know, right? But you need letters of recommendation, preferably from people the grad program have heard of, right? So, and then you go through graduate school and maybe you publish a few articles, but what determines whether you publish? Well, the reviewers and the editors say it's a good article. That's the criteria. This is others' evaluations. This is at every step. So because so much of our success hinges on what other people think, the conformity pressures are immense within academia.
Oh, scarily so. I mean, for example, I've had the experience of writing quite a good article, I thought. Actually, it was a book chapter. Was really, really happy with it. And then having it knocked back for completely spurious reasons. In my case, it was because I said I was talking about different research methodologies, the philosophical paradigms, and I said, here is where empiricism is useful, and here's why we're not going to use it in this chapter. And the reviewer just saw empiricism and exploded and said, this reeks of empiricism, and rejected the chapter, right? So it's like, well, we can't even reject empiricism. It's now become like Voldemort, right? So I mean, that level of conformity. Another article I wrote that I thought was quite good. They sent it back with corrections, and the corrections basically changed it from an article that was fairly well written and was arguing a point concisely into this jargon-filled monstrosity in which it no longer became comprehensible. You'd have to run it.
Familiar,
isn't it? You'd have to. Maybe it might become comprehensible if Google develop a new version of Google Translate or DeepL or something like that. like select language, academic bullshit. There you go. And then it gives you the arguments, because the arguments, you often find this, right, especially in education. you go along to this talk of this famous professor, and they might have a good argument that's actually quite easy to understand, but they have to put it in all this bullshit terminology that's completely unnecessary. And the function of it seems to be, oh, look at me, look how smart I am. You can't understand this because you're not as smart as me. And actually, the argument's really simple. It's like, why the fuck are you doing that? I mean...
And I do think
it's all
Mike's,
conformity, right? It's all
sometimes
conformity.
Mike sends me an article from philosophy, and I'm like, Mike, I don't understand this article, and he's like, well, that's okay. Nobody understands this article, you know. It's like, it's like
oh God,
I'm really struggling. He's like, just skip that part. Let's focus on this part. Oh, okay.
Well,
I'll
like
give
if
that
you're
a try.
reading, I mean, this comes from like the postmodernists of the critical theorists did this, right? Foucault would sometimes have a good point, but Jesus, man, his writing. And so I thought maybe it's me, and I spoke to French people, and they were like, it's just the same.
I can't pick it up offhand. I'm pretty sure there's a Foucault quote where he says he, kind of had his ideas and he wrote them, and then he added like 30% of sort of, flowery fluff in order to seem impressive. Like, that's not a quote, but I'm pretty sure there's some quote to that effect, actually.
Judith Butler essentially says that what she does is she creates all this confusing language in order to break down the barriers and make things amorphous so that you can't categorize them. And this is kind of like a metaphor to what people do for sex, because people define people as male and female. They trap them, and we need to queer the boundaries and break them by having 252 different genders. So she actually thinks that she's doing that. Yeah, and she thinks that's a good thing. Or she used to think that anyway.
I want to talk about a part of the Princeton Principles that I don't think it was in it. Doesn't really appear in either of the other two, and that's the part about scholarship. I don't think that the spirit might be in the Chicago Principles or even in the Kalven Report, but this section really feels. When I was reading, the part before that, I was like, oh, Chicago, Kalven, I'm seeing that, but this part, and, is, maybe it, resonates a little bit more, even more with me, but, this one paragraph, all questions are welcome starting points for scholarly inquiry, no matter how controversial or offensive they may be to some, and work should be judged by its intellectual and creative force, and its provocation of vital debate and its potential to shed light on problems and phenomena. So what was this? I'm just wondering,
I can just relay the spirit of the discussions, and it was, a lot. Let me contrast it with what I think has been too much of the focus on campus free speech stuff. There is, has been the, bringing in outside speakers who get protested, and maybe you have the heckler's veto and the event gets canceled. You have that with Ben Shapiro. You used to have it with Milo Yiannopoulos. And it's like, those are real issues and they're important, and the university shouldn't do those things. But those events are like just a drop in the bucket compared to what goes on within academia. And I think we were all professors. We were all in the, and we were partially, again, I'm reading the tea leaves here, but I think pretty much everyone was there because they saw either in reality or at least the potential for all of our work to be threatened by this sort of rising censoriousness throughout academia. So this was a way to push back on that. So no, institutions, you need to protect my right to say something that pisses off my colleagues, right? So that's the normal, the street version of it, but that's where that came from. That there absolutely is an attempt to clearly emphasize the role of the university in protecting scholars' right to engage in scholarship, in it, and scholarship broadly construed. Like I'm going to be super clear. I am speaking only for myself. I'm not speaking for Rutgers. But this whole discussion is absolutely, I would think of this as part of my scholarship. Part of my scholarship is on political radicalization. It's on threats to a liberal democracy, and it is actually on free and open inquiry and academic freedom. So this is not a peer-reviewed paper, but I would think of this as a piece of that. So scholarship broadly construed absolutely needs to be protected, and the administrations of many universities are ranging from failing to do so, failing to protect scholars from engaging in, work that is controversial, that will piss people off, to worse, participating in
Yes.
the whether it's cancellation attacks, denunciation, public shaming, and in some cases firing people. And
And
they fire people directly. Sometimes they actually fire them, or they pressure, they
yeah.
make things so unpleasant that the person voluntarily leaves. So
Yeah. I mean, I loved this line that's actually in the Princeton Principles. Universities and their units should refrain from publicly denouncing the research or
yeah,
extramural comments
yeah.
of members of the campus community with whom they disagree, lest they create official pariahs.
Right.
And, there's,
Right.
yeah.
Because they have been. They've been
Yes.
doing, not all of them, probably not even most, but some have been doing that. They have absolutely done that. And it's like, that's really bad. And, we're trying to create social and political pressure to, I doubt we're going to be able to stop it, but we may be able to limit it. We may get some traction in some places.
So another reason why it's really, really important to go after these, slightly perceivably dodgy questions, for lack of a better term, these kind, is because if you want to push back at bigots who actually hold to these bigoted ideas, then you need to answer their questions, right?
Yeah,
so for example, two examples of that. So we had Will Riley on the podcast, and one of the things he does in his book Taboo, is he looks at this thing. Okay, so one thing that a lot of bigots believe is that Black people are all of a lower IQ than white people. Okay, let's just treat that as a hypothesis, and let's go out and test it. And then he goes out and tests it and goes through all the data, qualifies it by age group, education level and the rest of it. And then he finds, surprise, surprise, the IQ difference goes away. So by taking on a question that you're not supposed to take on, that is a taboo, he comes up with evidence that breaks the racist allegation. Similarly, Thomas Sowell, like another thing that racists will often say as well, look at sub-Saharan Africa. Why is it that they haven't developed and white people in Northern Europe have? Well, it must be down to some natural superiority of Europeans. And Thomas Sowell goes, okay, let's look at that as a hypothesis. And then Sowell goes through looking at navigable waterways in Africa and basically finds that there aren't many, if any, and at certain times of the year they're impassable. So you can't get trade into those regions, which are also a lot more arid, less able to grow crops. And these are two massive explainers of why they can't develop to the same level. So by taking on the controversial questions, instead of avoiding them like some pious, Catholic from, like the types that burned Galileo, that's what gives us the ammunition.
This whole modern set of developments reminds me of being like in high school and learning about the Puritans in America, and their intolerance and witch burning. And I'm like, and thinking how ridiculous, like how superstitious, how this is horrible, but these are like some of the earliest Americans, and how could anyone think like this? And here we are. I mean, they're not literally burning witches, but they're firing people, they're publicly shaming people, they're having papers retracted. It's the modern version of the Puritans, and it's like, what? I can't believe I just said that. I can't believe that the situation warrants me just saying that.
Well, one of the things that I was talking with I do have a couple of people who still speak to me, and what I was talking to one of
them's me.
And we were talking, and one of the things that she noticed in her profession is that that one group of people, primarily left-leaning people, seem to be going after people before books get published, before articles get published. So leaning, saying, oh, you can't write about this kind of character because you don't have that kind of, background. You need to make your statement in your article that, apologizes for who you are, so it's the pre-publication. So authors are getting their book contracts pulled, and, books are getting pulled from publication and stuff on the front end. And then you have on the other side, people going into libraries, school libraries or whatever, and pulling books off and going, this one's bad and this one's bad. And didn't we hear just recently that in Canada, they want to get rid of everything like before 1988 or something like it's like, that's the way they're going to get rid of books, is just like,
I hadn't heard that.
It was, some kind of, if it was like before, and I mean, it was like recent, like 1980. Well, to me, that's still recent.
It was pretty recent.
Yeah. Anything before 19. So and they're not doing it like for books. It's like, well, that's just how we're going to decide what's on the school shelves. So anything before that, we're just going to,
Wow.
So there was like a proposal, that was one of the proposals. So, I think, some of that research that comes out that says, multiple studies saying that, first, it started that a left-wing academic would not sit at lunch with said in these surveys, I wouldn't sit next to someone who was from the other side. And then, a few years later, they did a follow-up and they found it was basically equal, that the, before that, it seemed that right-leaning people were more, maybe less sensitive, I should say, less sensitive to who they might eat lunch with. And new PhDs are saying that they would not approve of a research proposal, a grant proposal, or an article that they reviewed that they didn't agree with, that they politically didn't agree with. And they think that's okay. They will write on they'll check the box that says that social justice issues are more important than academic freedom and free speech. So these are the new PhDs that are entering, the workforce. And I hope you're right that some of this kind of push, but boy, they're awfully righteously indignant. And I can be pretty righteously indignant myself, but so I recognize one when I see one. What has Princeton done? Have they actually embraced this? Have other schools? Has Rutgers?
No, not as far as I know. As far as I know, nobody has adopted them yet.
Okay.
And I don't,
I think Cornell put out Cornell Freedom Alliance. It said, we want to do this. I don't know if they have.
There's been a fair amount of, there's been some, kind of buzz about it. In these sort of academic freedom circles, mostly supportive. There's been one or two, pretty good criticisms too. Like, I don't really agree with them, but they were like thoughtful. It wasn't like, these are just a bunch of racists. Right? It was thoughtful. It was like, well, in this piece of it, it purports to be advancing academic freedom, but it actually could be a threat in these ways. Like, I think that was wrong, but it was not thoughtful. It was thoughtful. So. But most of what's been written has been pretty supportive. But so there's this buzz, and whether it's going to happen, who the hell knows? Rutgers is a weird case because we've never adopted the Chicago Principles. But Holloway, our president, has made some pretty strong statements, supporting academic freedom and free speech, that are Chicago-esque in their spirit. So. But why we haven't adopted them, I have no idea. This is like, I have no idea how Rutgers works. Rutgers is an insane bureaucracy, and it's like, and it's got all these things. There's like a faculty senate, and there's a faculty council, and they supposedly have say, but as far as I can tell, they're like the Dumas and Diets from Europe in the 1700s. They're there for show, and then the administration then just goes on doing whatever the hell it wants. So
yeah. So you haven't seen any evidence that these have been
no adopted? No.
Yeah.
Not yet. But I mean, they just came out in August, so that would be. I wouldn't have expected anything yet. So, and I don't. Realistically, the Chicago state. This is a bigger set of statements in the Chicago statement. But one strength of the Chicago Statement is how short and pithy it is.
Yes.
And so that makes it easier to digest, I think, than the Princeton Principles. So I think we created a little bit of a headwind by wanting to say more.
Right.
But we wanted to say more. Like, that the whole point was to say more. So,
and like you said, it really went beyond. I mean, the Princeton Principles goes beyond free speech,
right,
to specifically academic freedom. And, and again, I mean, that's more what the Kalven Report was after, was that academic freedom. But again, it was very short. And I don't think you can, I mean, it's a new world, I mean, I don't think that people who wrote either, the Chicago Statement or the Kalven Report could have foreseen something like this creation of pariahs. Now, look, workplace mobbing has been around for a long time. I'm sure, but one of the things I went to what's that, AA, the American Association of University Professors.
AAUP,
Yeah. So I went to a academic freedom talk, and the guys, and one of the things I noticed is that the assumption was that all of the professors are all in on this, academic freedom thing, and that professors have each other's backs, and that it's maybe like professors against the administration or something like that. The assumption that all professors are good actors, that everyone has the best interests of the students at heart. And I think that's one of the flaws, of people's thinking when they, you can have this sort of, utopian idea. But when you don't make it, when you don't bring it down to, I mean, look, there's going to be individual cases where people don't have each other's backs, and people don't have the best interests of each other or academic freedom really at heart. They have their own personal interests at heart, and that's what they care about. And so I was a little disappointed when I went to the AAUP little talk, because I was like, I don't think you know what's going on in the world. Like, these people are at each other.
I mean, look, academia is overwhelmingly left, and it's increasingly a large proportion far left. My former student, Nate Honeycutt, did his dissertation on this. He surveyed almost 2,000 faculty nationwide from across the disciplines, and 40% self-identified as radicals, activists, Marxists, or socialists. That's the comparable number in the like in a national survey in the U.S. is going to be in single digits, depending on the survey, 5%, 7%, 8%, something like that. So this is a massive overrepresentation of the far left, and so that's who the AAUP represents. And so there's a gigantic, it's either a blind spot or disinterest in threats to free speech and open inquiry and academic freedom that come from within its ranks, because its ranks are pretty unified. They're pretty politically unified. So, so I'm not surprised to hear this. It's consistent with when I've read like AAUP materials or conferences. It's all Trump as a threat to free speech.
Right.
It's now it's DeSantis and the legislature, and they are, there are real free speech, academic freedom issues there. Those are absolutely bona fide. It is reasonable for anyone to be concerned or even reject some of those. The state legislatures that are prohibiting institutes of higher education from discussing divisive concepts or critical. That has to be illegal. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a psychologist, but that almost has to, I can't imagine that not violating the First Amendment. The state government cannot tell adults what they can and cannot say, even adults who work for them. So, so there are bona fide things there, but there's a complete obliviousness to the censoriousness that is rising from within academia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, it is weird, though, right? Because free speech and academic freedom are not subsets, and they can and do conflict, right? So academic freedom protects my right to explore deeply controversial or offensive topics. But free speech, it permits you to denounce me for it, and it permits you to hold a protest saying I should be fired, and to create a letter writing campaign to my dean telling them that I should be fired and shouldn't be allowed around students. Your right to say those things is absolutely protected, but those are actually a threat to my academic freedom.
Right.
So that is how they can and do conflict. One is not a subset of the other.
Right.
But freedom of speech doesn't cover slander and libel, does it?
No.
But so here's the key question.
Yeah.
So if they have a letter writing campaign to your dean saying that you're a racist or that you're a homophobe, is that covered by slander and libel, or is that just somebody's opinion? So. Right, that's the problem, isn't it?
You really need a lawyer. You need a constitutional lawyer in here on this. But my limited understanding of the case law on this is that judges generally treat those kind of things as like street insults. It would be like if you call somebody an asshole, you're not going to be, there's no liability for slander or libel. And so, being called a racist or a homophobe is usually treated as this is just like another insult. It's not going to be taken seriously. There's no substance there. And so there's no slander or libel.
But the worrying thing is that you don't need any substance. So, for example, in my case, I've been accused of being a homophobe, and loads of people have decided nice, intelligent people have decided to dislike me because I'm a homophobe. And there's no example of me doing anything homophobic. There's not like Mike did this. There's not even somebody taking something that I said and exaggerating it, like they usually do. Just like, he's a homophobe. What did he do that was homophobic? Homophobic stuff. And no examples, and yet the damage is done, right?
It's done, right?
And this is the point where, I'm talking from a moral point of view rather than a legal point of view. That you have to make a distinction between calling somebody a fucking dickhead and a homophobe or a racist, because these people will just take these terms on uncritically and use them to damage somebody's career. I mean, it's damaged my career.
Right. That's where Haidt's work comes in, right? That the purity accusation, the moral accusation, that now you're contaminated, right? So if you're an asshole, that's one thing. But if you're, a racist, then you're impure. And so, you might still have drinks with an asshole, but you're not going to have lunch with a racist, right?
It's the new red letter.
And I'm also woke, by the way. I'm also woke. I've also been labelled as woke for correcting somebody on their reading of Kimberly Crenshaw's Mapping the Margins paper and saying, no, that's not quite what she's arguing. Here's what she's arguing. You're woke. And then I get tarnished with that too. And people, Mike's actually woke in disguise, and he's here to infiltrate the woke resistance movement and mess it up from within.
Is there a woke resistance movement? Wait, what did I miss?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of...
Yeah, well, Rufo and Hanadia are pretty
that's
much...
true. That's true. That's true. Yeah.
I mean, they wouldn't use that term, but that's pretty much what they are.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Ron DeSantis might call them that, I guess. Right. So what is do you have any next steps? Does the group have any next steps? Did they just put this out there and they're just sort of like waiting to see what happens? I mean, I know that you wrote one of the reasons we wanted to have you is because you wrote on your Substack about this and said, hey, we want to get the word out. And so I'm just wondering, like, is anybody?
Yeah. So the key players there, George and Whittington, are pretty well connected. They hang around bigwig political circles and certain academic circles. And so I believe there's a push behind the scenes to kind of spread the word and begin sort of agitating for adoption. That's what I think is going on. But I haven't heard, no one said that to me per se. But I mean, at the time they talked about this rollout and publicity and all this sort of stuff. So they're probably working on it and continuing to work on it. So they haven't pinged me and said, well, this is phase 2 of the plan.
Yeah.
They did. Phase 2 was, this is the final version. Feel free to publicize it. I did. I assume there's going to be a phase 3 where they actually try to implement it, but I have not gotten marching orders on that yet. So.
Yeah. And Princeton might be a hard sell.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, the places it's, so again, let's put this in some context. Universities across the country skew left. They skew heavily left, but they skew. That's a Freudian slip. They skew less heavily left, kind of in the the west, not the far west, not the coastal west, but the the Rocky Mountains and the Midwest and the South.
Yes.
Okay. And so I think you're more likely to get traction for things like the Princeton Principles in those places that are not so heavily captured. So
one of the things, I had somebody on a week or so ago where we were talking about similar issues, and one of the things that she had mentioned was that they noticed that the private institutions who had adopted the Chicago statement, they were able, her organization was much more able to help students there. So specifically, because of course, public institutions already, they have to abide by the First Amendment anyway, but that it was really important at private institutions that it made it a lot easier for students to fight back and stuff. So it'll be interesting to, I don't know how many of them are sorry they did it.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. One of the things I learned at the Princeton Principal meetings from Robbie George. This is just part of the discussion. It didn't make it into the document, but that when this is directly relevant to what you were just saying about these private colleges adopting the Chicago principles, that when colleges and universities post commitments to free speech and academic freedom on their websites, that functions as a legal commitment. It's a commitment to faculty and it's a commitment to students, which means they can be sued for violating those things. So that was very interesting. I learned something from that piece of it. So it is. So what you're describing, Elizabeth, is dead on. When the universities adopt these things, and if it's publicly available somewhere, there's both pressure and possibly a legal commitment whereby they actually have to abide by it.
Yeah.
Whereas if they don't have to, so.
Right. So, we, I don't know if Rutgers has, my university does not have this yet, although there has been talk, those bias reporting systems.
Yeah, we thank God we don't.
Yeah. There's a lot of schools that have them. And so, this is where, faculty can report on each other and students can report on each other, and then both all. But I was thinking when I read these and stuff, it's like, oh well, maybe if they try to put that into effect, and I can't help, it's like, well, maybe we should also have, that there should be a box to check and to fill out for also, not just a microaggression for, whatever the, social justice related, but related to, feeling self-censoring, feeling like you can't speak out, and those kinds of things. So I was thinking, well, maybe that would be another tack, because I pushed against it when they tried to do it, and so far successfully. Mostly I was asking, well, where's this information going to go, and who's going to be able to use it? So, and these were some non-tenured people. Some non-tenured people were on the committee. And I said, for example, could it be used in your tenure review? And they were like, ooh, now all of a sudden they don't like it, right? It's like, oh, when I just thought it was going to be against you, Elizabeth, I liked it a lot. But, now that I think it's going to be against me, maybe I don't like it so much. But yeah, I mean, shouldn't we also be tracking, if you're going to start tracking this stuff, then maybe we should also be tracking threats to free speech and threats to in the classroom, and, academic threats to academic freedom. Maybe I could add that to the list.
If you had a poor working group, you could flood the system with with reports, right? I mean, and what isn't biased? Like everything is
I
biased,
know.
right?
Yeah.
So you could, as an act of civil disobedience, flood the system with reports of bias, and they'd have, by their own rules, they'd have to investigate all of them, and they'd eventually just crash and burn.
Well, that was exactly what I suggest. That was one of the scenarios that I suggested, which was I said, look, if somebody had a grudge against a professor, I don't know who that could be, but if they did, they just have all of their friends and all of their classes say that this professor is, said racist things, engaged in microaggressions, and then the professor is done. They don't even bother to investigate. They say, we got 60 complaints against you.
Right.
That's obvious. There's
Right.
no reason to investigate you. You're done.
Right.
Well,
Right.
Although I have to warn you on this, because that's how, like the OK symbol, that started off as Operation OKKK, which was like on 4chan, where some people were like, these leftists are completely out of control. Let's like create this rumor that the OK symbol is a far right thing. And they'll make themselves look so ridiculous that like nobody will ever be able to take them seriously again. Yeah. Sounded like a great plan. And then they went ahead and did it. And it worked. And now like the OKKK sound is now like supposed to be a racist microaggression. And they're actually, punishing people for doing it. So
yeah.
I don't know. Be careful.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, be careful what you wish for.
Be careful what you wish for.
True.
Yes. So what else? Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a story and then an action, which are different, both related to and different than the Princeton Principles. About 10, 12 years ago, this sort of harks back to some of the earlier discussions about sort of ideological capture and stuff. A student of mine wrote a proposal for a small grant to do research, empirical research on political biases, mostly left-wing political biases in psychology. And there was already a literature on this. There's a bigger literature on left-wing biases because the faculty are mostly left. There's too few people on the right to study, really. So most of the literature is on left-wing biases. So she wrote this proposal, and it got turned down. And usually these small internal grants, I don't know, my students' hit rate is like
they're actually harder sometimes.
Yeah, well, my lab's hit rate was very high, somewhere around 90%. And I'm like, what the hell? So I looked at the review. There was a review, and it was all scientific. It was the methods were not great, and the theory was unclear, and it was all science. So I said, oh boy, maybe she just did a bad job writing this up, and I just sort of missed it. So I reread the grant proposal, and I thought it was really good. Like I was like, okay, I'm going to wear this with my skeptical hat on. I realize this is related to my lab, and that might be hard, but I can do skepticism, and I thought it was really good. But there was one paragraph. The paragraph where she reviewed the literature on left-wing biases in psychology. It's like, oh, yeah, they're pissed off at this. Everything else is bullshit. So I said, okay, we're going to do an anecdotal experiment. So in a real experiment, you hold everything the same. You change one thing. You have people in 2 or more groups, and you see what happens. Are there differences between the groups on whatever you care about? Attitudes or behavior or beliefs? I'm a sociologist. That's what I do. So, if you're doing clinical psychology, well, does the depression get better in one condition than the other? Okay. So in an anecdotal experiment, you change one thing and you see what happens, but it's one shot. It's just, it's an anecdote. It's not, okay. So what we decided to do, I can't believe we did this. And I can't believe the whole story is just too good to be true. We left the entire proposal intact. Except for one thing. We deleted the paragraph that addressed the actual literature on left-wing biases in psychology and replaced it with a paragraph that denounced Charles Murray, Nazis, and social Darwinists. which it's like, okay, like, what is this? This is just nonsense. And it was so, it was, I mean, we knew what we were doing, but the way we did it, we felt like we were vamping for the camera, and this would be obvious, right? No. They funded the project.
Oh,
They funded the project.
Wow.
They funded the project. So, and like, I guess denouncing Charles Murray improved our theory and methods. Right?
Yeah, right. Sure it did.
Okay, so there's that story, and then this other initiative, which is related in spirit. It's like a cousin to me. It's a cousin of the Princeton Principles. The Princeton Principles are principles with some guidelines for action. What's going to matter, though, are the actions, right?
Mhm.
If nobody does anything with this, it's just going to fall into a black hole and dissipate. And 20 years from now, Princeton Principles, what the hell was that, right? I mean, it has to lead to things that are implementable. Okay, so this wasn't inspired by the Princeton Principles per se, but it was inspired by the same impetus that led to the Princeton Principles. That things are getting really bad. We need to do something about it. And unless we do something to protect academic freedom and open inquiry, it's all just going to end up corroded in a swamp of political and ideological corruption. Okay, so we created this new society, the Society for Open Inquiry in the Behavioral Sciences, that is dedicated to protecting and providing a space for free and open inquiry, invulnerable to this other nonsense that now pervades academia. And we have a journal. And kind of, Mike, this goes back to one of the earliest things, where you were being tortured by reviewers and stuff. So I have a Substack essay on this journal, so people can go there. It's told announcing the Journal for Open Inquiry in the Behavioral Sciences or something like that. So they can find out more about that there. But the key thing there is we actually don't. Our articles get submitted; they get subject to peer review, but we do not tell authors what they have to do. We say, look, here are the reviews. Let's say I'm action editor. I think the reviewers made some good points. I think it's in your interest to address these points. You don't have to if you don't want to. It's entirely up to you. You should really address them if you think they're relevant. I think they're relevant. I think they will improve your paper if you address them. But if you don't have to do it, and we'll publish the paper. So it is intended to address exactly the kind of nonsense that you were talking about, which wasn't necessarily political, but also the kind of nonsense in this Charles Murray grant. Right? So, and the first grant was better. The proposal was better because it drew on the actual literature. The second was just I added some political nonsense, and that made the grant better. So
yeah, of course, yeah. So we, again, we have examples of that. We were asked. My students were asked, who had been studying Black Lives Matter. They were asked, why didn't you study QAnon, or why didn't you study Proud Boys or whatever? Well, first of all, they weren't a thing when we started the study. It was 2 years before when we had, but I mentioned, well, you realize that would have offended some people too. Oh, well, that's okay. It doesn't matter if you offend those people.
Right.
So yeah, like you said, with your paragraph, it's fine to denounce. We can denounce, go ahead and denounce the people that we don't like.
Right.
That's fine if you disparage their characters or do research that might make them look bad. I mean, it really is. It's kind of embarrassing, right? It's embarrassing.
Well, yeah. I mean, except I don't think they have any sense to be embarrassed by any of this. I mean, part of it is, this is throughout, especially younger faculty. Everyone's biased. Everything's political. My politics are better than yours. My biases are better than yours.
Mm-hmm. I like that. My biases are better than yours. Yeah.
And therefore you are some combination of stupid and evil, and usually both of those things.
Yeah. I mean, that's right.
So, I mean, this is a point I made to Helen Pruckrose the other day, who's still
Did
thinks
you have her on?
No, we will do it like at some point. She's I don't know what's going on with her right now. Well, she's a friend. But on Twitter, a point that I made to Helen the other day, which, and she still considers herself to be on the left. Certainly socially and economically, I still measure on the left.
On the left. I ran an indivisible group in 2017. The sort of protect the country from Trump's corrosion group. I just did that. The political compass. If you go on. Right. I'm like left libertarian. That's where I am.
Same, exactly.
Like not all the way down, but kind of
kind of like
sort of center. Yep.
No, and I score pretty much the same every year when I do it. So I always do like because I've noticed that like I get called increasingly more far right, and then I look on the test, and because I'm open, like maybe I have moved significantly, and I'm just not aware of it. That's possible.
Like no,
sure.
And so I test it, and every year I'm roughly the same space.
Right.
So so the point I was making to Helen was like, okay. And this is something she is aware of, obviously, but people were having a go at her because they were saying, look, you claim to be on the left, but you're criticizing the left, you're showing disloyalty, and you're being a fanboy for the far right, you're helping them. And my point would be, look, you need to get your house in order.
Absolutely.
If I want to become a social psychologist and I become an undergrad in one of your courses, and you think that I'm a really bright student with a promising future in the discipline, and I'm really motivated, you're not going to validate every single mistake I make. You're going to call me on my shit repeatedly until I get my act sorted out. Yes. And that's going to be in my interests because that will make me a much better person. And the same is true for a political movement. Political movements on the left or the right are going to make mistakes. Just like organizations make mistakes, companies, schools.
Right.
And the way that a company, a school, a university, a post office, a ladies' reading club, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, does it? Whatever kind of institution, whatever, a group of friends, a group of 4 friends, how do you improve that group? Would you make sure that everybody feels comfortable, perhaps in a polite way, laying out criticisms so that the individual members of the group can grow and the group itself can also grow? And so what you're doing with this kind of ideological intolerance that's happening is you're making the left more and more absurd. And this is literally in there. Well, it's literally in there.
Yes.
People are saying that you need to validate this stuff. This is like smart people. And by the way, like it's a quick retort to the point that you made earlier about smart people having high IQs and SAT scores and stuff. It's not enough, is it? I mean, you can have all of those things and in the conversation come across as dumb.
Absolutely. That's right.
Because there seems to be this superficiality, right? They go and they. And I noticed this. I noticed this when I was studying philosophy, and there would be people again. This is a very prestigious university in the UK. I noticed there were people that had all of the high IQs and everything, would perform well in the test, and would go to the student union pub afterwards, have a few drinks, and some of us would be discussing philosophy and spinning off into psychology and really enjoying that kind of intellectual. And they'd be talking about American Idol or the X Factor or something like that. And they were as smart as us, but their minds weren't kind of inclined into kind of anything intellectual, or it only was for the purposes of the cause.
They're in the bar, they're relaxing. I would cut them some slack. Listen, my colleagues in a writ large sense have many limitations and flaws, but I've probably watched it in passing, but I've never watched American Idol. I have no interest in any of that stuff. But if you're sitting around in a bar, what the hell? It's just
come on. You're at one of the most prestigious institutions in the UK, having drinks. You just come out of a lecture, like. What you're talking about American Idol?
My wife and I are watching Ted Lasso. We totally love it.
Right? I have no idea what that is.
It's about an American football coach who comes to England to coach a struggling professional soccer football team. And it's sort of a dramatic, dramedy, a dramatic comedy. And it's great.
It's awesome.
Totally love it.
It's really good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I bet I would
That's
absolutely
really- yeah.
hate it. But anyway, the point I'm trying to
You
make.
know what? Elizabeth and I are just going to start talking about it now, and you
Yeah,
can just sort of like go on.
the point I was trying to get to is that the university very much, like, the reason I decided to become an academic because I was the kind of person who would always be having these kind of in-depth
Yeah.
conversations like the one that we're having now, and many people would respond to it and say, "You're weird. You need to stop thinking, or you think too much," and the rest of it. And maybe I am. In fact, I think I probably am. But there are certain advantages to thinking in this kind of deep way, because you come up with quite profound answers and you have like a very in detail way of looking at things.
Yep.
And so my thought was, well, I should gravitate towards the kind of professions and institutions that value that kind of thinking, right? And that's supposed to be academia.
It's supposed to be.
It's supposed to be.
It's supposed to be.
And what I found when I got into academia is it was full of people who weren't like that, who weren't thinking about things. And some of them were genuinely bright. Some of them were kind of middle of the road, you know.
Yes.
And
yes.
But the
and
kind
the level
of
of superficiality is vast.
Was
shocking.
Everywhere
else.
So you know, I'm being a bit playful when I'm talking about American Idol. I mean, you can watch that and be a deep thinker, you know. Although if you are, you're going to look at that and think that's a horrible exploitation of mentally ill people, right? Because they're going
maybe
up and
that's
doing
why
those
you're
auditions.
watching it, though.
Maybe that's why you're watching it. Maybe you're a sadist. Let's do a paper on that. Sadism and American Idol.
Or a
masochist. But it just doesn't seem to be a space for the kind of person that it used to be.
Right.
And that's really sad. And it's like, you know, well, where do we go? Where is there left for us?
Yeah, so that was I mean, it took me 30 years to realize we have to create those spaces. There are small, you know, it's not all on us individually. There are sometimes other groups that do things like this. But they are few and far between. And if you want that, you have to work at it. You have to really create it. It does not happen naturally in most of academia, as far as I can tell.
No, I agree. And it was really my student lab where, you know, that's where I felt the most fulfilled always, you know, and I could be exhausted and go there and, you know, sort of like to your point, Mike, it's like we would, you know, we might be, you know, eating pizza in the lab, which by the way, we weren't allowed to do, but, you know, eating our Chinese food or eating our pizza or whatever. And then hiding the evidence, you know, we have to take the trash to a different building, you know. But, you know, we were always saying, you know, it's like, well, when your jokes are about psychology, then we know that, you know, you're really all in, right? Like we're using psychological theory to make jokes and stuff. And so, yeah, you do have, I think you do have to create a community, and maybe there's 2 or 3 people, you know, just 2 or 3 people really at your university or you know, in your department that you can really have those conversations with and talk about American Idol, right? And make psychology jokes while you're talking about American Idol, and really sort of interleave, you know, that in a way that that's fulfilling in your personal life and in your professional life. And I think that you know, just like finding a partner in life, that's you know, a crapshoot. And I think maybe at bigger institutions, maybe you have a better chance of finding those people. But you know, and we're also busy. We're so autonomous in this job. You know, that I don't think you know, I don't think we really. We're consumed by our own little bubble, and we have, I think there probably are more people at our universities that would or could be our friends, whatever that means, our friends and colleagues, our intellectual partners and things, and the way that our profession is, it's hard to find them. And I really envy that you spent time in a room with people talking about these Princeton principles. I mean, I really, I'm very envious of that. You know, that's that time that you had with those people really thinking hard about these issues.
Yeah, no, that was great. But you know, this first place, I am both good and fortunate in that I have 2 grad students working with me now. So I say good and fortunate because I selected them.
Mhm.
but I selected well. Now, some of that was luck because you don't really know what you're
No, you
getting until
don't.
they're
Yeah.
there and stuff.
Yeah.
So it was a combination of the two. But one came in with a degree in political science and the other with a degree in computer science. So neither of them had much psych background,
Yeah.
but the dynamic in the lab is terrific. It is like exquisite. And I can't imagine having made better choices, actually. So this is, and they really bring different things to the table.
Absolutely.
Things that are relevant to what I'm doing stuff on political radicalization. And some of it is the computer science person brings this whole, this is, again, outside my realm of expertise completely, this natural language processing, machine learning stuff often used to analyze like social media and big data that I know of primarily because of her, but I don't know it in any seriously expert way. But we are doing things because she takes the lead on that stuff. So it's just great. That part is just great. And then this meeting with Justin students, this is the philosophy professor who bumped us from last week to this week. That was really cool. Everything about that was very, very good. He's created a small space like that. It wasn't a lot of people. Maybe there were him, me, and two other faculty, one from physics and one of emeritus philosophy professor. And Rutgers philosophy department is like one of the three best in the country. So it's like they don't hire normal philosophers. I mean, it functions almost like an Ivy League philosophy department. And so this guy was like gigantic in his emeritus now. He's retired, but he was there. So it was a pretty decent faculty turnout for a student group. And then it was maybe 10 or 12 students. We were, Elizabeth and I were talking before, very diverse politically and in, pretty much every other way you can imagine. And it was great. Justin did a very good job by cobbling this group together. And it is that kind of space. It is a space to share ideas and address controversies that people may feel deeply about, but are able to engage sort of calmly and respectfully, even if there's some of it was upsetting. So it can be done. You have the Princeton group, you have, right? I have my lab, there is Justin's group, there's my SOIBS working group. It can be done, but it takes effort. It really takes, it doesn't just happen naturally.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we should end on that positive note.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.